where you join us today. Welcome to today's Twist Talk together with Kunal Ghosh, who will speak about his experience from being an academic to turning into an entrepreneur who is driven by the strong belief that business can actually play an important role for the good in society, and that spin-offs out of academia can play really an important role. Like last time, we again turn the current situation that is rather difficult and does not allow any travel. Actually, when going to the bakery is almost travel these days, into our advantage, and we use that to bring in really exceptional speakers. This time, Kunal, who is joining us from Palo Alto. So again, good morning, Kunal, and thanks for getting up early and joining us today. For those that have been not yet on the Twist Talk, I would like to give you some context of what Twist Talks are and remind those of you who have been there before. Twist Talks are organized by the Tech Transfer Office of IST. IST is a research institution with the goal to promote basic research and conduct basic research at its highest level, but at the same time wants to be aware that whenever something interesting happens that has a reach and a relevance beyond science, we want to recognize those things and turn them into products, technologies, potentially spin-off companies. And in order to get the highest chance to reach people that have ideas and turn them into entrepreneurs, we have developed a number of infrastructure at IST. We have a tech transfer office, we have spin-off fellowships, there is a tech transfer, a technology park, and there is IST Cube as a befriended, let's say, venture capital firm. And with these Twist Talks, we try to continuously throw an inspiring spark in our community, as we also all know that chance favors the prepared mind. So we try to prepare the minds and keep people always aware that there's something beyond science, or next to science, I should better say. So Kunal is the founder of and the CEO of Inscopix, a company founded out of Stanford University. He's located in Palo Alto. And this company is actually developing a platform for mapping brain circuits, or a mini microscope that looks into the brain and should serve as a very interesting tool of research, but also for drug development and maybe other inspiring things that happen. He's a frequent speaker about his topics of interest and passion. He's also serving on the World Economic Forum's Council of Neurotechnologies in the Brain. So he's quite an active person beyond his probably almost full 24/7 job as a CEO of a startup. So he's definitely a driven personality. He has a number of interesting academic backgrounds. He holds a BSc in electrical engineering from UPenn, a BS from Wharton, and a PhD from Stanford University. And as I learned in preparation to today's talk, he also spent some time in McKinsey, so he always had this little bit entrepreneurial and business gene already with him in himself. And well, we're looking forward to his talk. And what I would like to mention to our people on the screen, please, if you have a question, we have a Q&A session at the end. Just type them into the Q&A button you see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have the chance to engage in the conversation and some Q&A with Kunal after his talk. So Kunal, thanks again for being here, and very much looking forward to insight into the brain.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. And it's a real honor also for me to be here today as one of your Twist speakers. In an ideal world, I would be out there on the outskirts of Vienna at your beautiful campus, giving this talk and interacting with the community there. Maybe in the near future, that'll happen. But for now, hopefully this virtual means will provide the intended benefits that you're hoping from these seminar talks. Certainly looking forward to visiting your beautiful campus at some point in the near future. In preparation for this talk, I did a little bit of research myself into the the institute and the programs, and of course, some of what you were speaking to in terms of tech transfer. And I think it's a wonderful concept that now is starting to obviously come together at ISD, a relatively young institution, but clearly setting itself up to be a leading research institution. And certainly I love how from the get-go, from just the early beginnings of this institution, there is a focus on nurturing entrepreneurship, really identifying potentially game-changing innovations coming out of the sciences, the engineering groups, and really promoting, or at least encouraging, the process of understanding how those innovations can be transferred into society. And that's what I'll speak about. How do we really get innovations out of the lab, from the bench, so to speak, into society for the betterment of humanity. So let me take a little bit of a step back and maybe start with expanding a little bit on my own background, and then I will try my best here to provide at least my perspectives with respect to nurturing university-based innovation and facilitating their transfer into society. I'll do my best to provide my own perspectives through the prism of the company that I founded in Scopix, which arguably, is an example of university-based innovation in the biotech space being transferred into society for the betterment of humanity through entrepreneurship, through a startup. But let me start a little bit about myself, and hopefully that provides some context as we spend the next few minutes together. So I came, as Alex mentioned briefly, from an engineering background. I myself was studying electrical engineering at the University of Pennsylvania about 15 years ago. And I was always very much interested in imaging, and specifically electronics for imaging. And also, as Alex alluded to, while learning about engineering and circuits and doing research projects, I was also interested in business and the intersection of technology and entrepreneurship. And this was something that I always kind of had in me, maybe latently, an interest in business and entrepreneurship. My first venture, actually a couple of ventures, were when I was in high school. These are all informal ventures, no formal companies of any sort. One was literally selling T-shirts, but printed, customized T-shirts. This is back in the early 90s, early mid 90s, when digitization and custom mugs and T-shirts were still very much a thing of the future. Now, of course, we take it for granted. And my second, again, informal venture was putting up a website for the soccer football fans out there. I was always very interested in football, and Man United was one of my favorite teams back then. And again, in the mid 90s, putting together a website and developing an e-commerce portal for a specific fan base was also pretty novel. Again, now it's easy. We can stand up a website in a weekend, and of course, the e-commerce platforms are across the world and in every domain. So it reminds me actually of a proverb, or maybe a saying, that one of my Wharton professors used to say at UPenn, and I'll come back again to UPenn as part of my journey, that entrepreneurs are born, and they you cannot teach entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are born. I kind of disagree with that statement. I mean, at the end of the day, the very basis of what you are all doing at Twist, the very basis of a lot of the companies, great companies that have spawned out of academia especially, are thanks to entrepreneurs that have been formed through the course of their experiences, whether in grad school or serendipitously. And I do believe that there is some truth, of course, to this statement that entrepreneurs are born and not taught. Because when we look around at the famous entrepreneurs in society, many of them, had no formal education, no training. I mean, there are stories, of course, of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Elon Musk to some extent, although he did have a college degree from UPenn, in fact. So there are a lot of stories, of course, of amazing entrepreneurs, both big time and also, small scale, that were very successful without any training whatsoever. So there is merit, of course, to this time-old adage that entrepreneurs are born and they're not taught. However, where I disagree with my professor's statement is when it comes to university-based, science-based ventures, because I really do believe that for very sophisticated innovations and for the companies that are really on the frontiers of driving science and technology, the leaders, especially the founders of those companies, are often, groomed through years of scientific engineering training, and in many cases intertwined with business. And that brings me back to my own journey, that whereas I was maybe always nascently interested in business and entrepreneurship, through these high school ventures that I spoke about, there is no question that I felt I needed to be taught business. I needed to really learn about the tools of the trade, so to speak. And that's partly why I enrolled in the University of Pennsylvania's management technology program, where I was able to get a joint degree in electrical engineering and in business. And I think that set me up for what I ended up doing in the context of starting a company through my research project. But still, at the end of my college experience, I felt I was not really in a position to start a company, because I firmly believe that if I were to start a company, which I think many of you out there also believe and share, that it would be a science technology driven company. I never saw myself coming out of even college in 2004, out of university, that I would, start an internet portal or the next, Instagram was not even a thing back then, but the next social media site. I never saw myself, as that kind of an entrepreneur. I always felt that I would, be that person who was developing technology, science for the benefit of humanity. And if that had really the potential to scale, that I would then start a company to really translate that technology into society. So given that prism of technology-based startup, technology-based entrepreneurship, I actually felt that the right thing to do after college was to go and get a graduate degree, so I could really start, understanding what are some of the big gaps today in terms of human health, in terms of technology needs in the life sciences in the context of human health. So with, again, nascent interests in entrepreneurship, was training at Wharton and at UPenn. I went into the graduate program in electrical engineering at Stanford. And at Stanford, I really, came up at the end of the day with what became the basis for Inscopix, this unmet need in the neurosciences, where, there was little, if anything, to literally look into the brain to understand how neural processes, neural circuit patterns give rise to behavior. A very central question, how does the mind, how do our emotions, our thinking, our cognitive abilities, how do all these arise from neural process, from biology? Very much a mystery. How do diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, mental illness, how are these caused, let alone treated or cured? Big mystery. So again, in the early days of my grad school program, with that engineering background, I felt that there was a real opportunity to build a technology that could provide literally a window into the brain. And again, without necessarily, going too much into the weeds of my PhD journey, I did eventually, together with colleagues, collaborators, develop what became the miniature integrated microscope, the Miniscope, which Alex alluded to in his introduction, which provided, again, a literal window into the brains of behaving animal subjects. So in the neurosciences, we, and this is true for, I think, biology in general, we rely quite a bit on animal models, but especially in the neurosciences, where it's really difficult to do brain research on patients, let alone healthy human subjects. We just can't open up the brains left, right, and center of people unless there is a real compelling need to. We rely on animal models. And animal models have been the mainstay of preclinical drug development and of neuroscience research. So our first order of business was to develop a technology, and a microscope-based technology, that could monitor large numbers of neurons, the activity of these neurons in real time across hundreds to thousands of neurons in a freely behaving mouse or rat, and would provide researchers, neuroscientists, the ability to start understanding how do we, form memories? How do we, make basic decisions? How do we become addicted? How, in the context of disease models, do these diseases arise from abnormal neural circuit patterns? So those were the questions we were seeking to address, research questions. And the technology became very promising for providing these kinds of enabling data sets. And again, in the context of this talk, and my journey from the lab into a startup, with that nascent interest in entrepreneurship, with training, especially from the University of Pennsylvania, not much at Stanford in the context of entrepreneurship. I think what you guys are doing at IST is really good to help budding entrepreneurs, postdocs, grad students with, again, the tools of the trade, with exposure. At Stanford, especially from the engineering school, while there are resources that are available to help budding entrepreneurs translate their technology innovations into society, at least when I was a grad student, there wasn't necessarily an organized program the way IST has via Twist. And maybe that's because Stanford and Stanford students have just been spoiled with respect to the fact that there are all these great examples, Yahoo, Google, Instagram. There's a long list, biotech companies that have spawned out of the university with really not much proactive effort from the university to nurture entrepreneurship. Obviously, the university has done a phenomenal job in bringing together great talent, infrastructure, resources to enable innovation. And the translation from the university into Silicon Valley, into society, has often happened pretty organically because of the fact that the students have faculty members who have been exposed to companies, who have started companies. They have networks of VCs, and before you know it, there is an organic, convergence of talent, of resources, and a startup is spawned with little or no, effort from the institution, from the university itself. I do think it's important at a place like IST and other regions of the world that institutions do play a little bit more of a proactive role to just seed that entrepreneurial venture before, again, VCs come in and other resources are made available. I've seen this in Switzerland. I've seen this in Lausanne, especially. I've seen this also in Geneva with the campus biotech. So I do think that in many areas of the world, it is definitely required to proactively nurture institution-based innovation into entrepreneurial ventures. But again, in the context of Stanford, at least, there has been a long history of successful university-based entrepreneurs, and that history definitely helped me. So even without necessarily, organized institutional support to nurture my miniature integrated microscope innovation and understand how it could become a business, I certainly had the help of my own advisors. I had the help of colleagues, peers, and very quickly through my advisors' networks, access to VCs and lawyers. And before you knew it, Inscopix was born. And of course, there was quite the process to get the technology and the company spun out of Stanford, which I'll speak to a little bit. But in the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, from the perspective of most of you out there who are listening today or will view the recording later, if you're in the the seat of a grad student or a postdoc, or maybe you're a faculty member at IST who is interested in in co-founding a company with a grad student or a postdoc. I think it's very important that we always think very critically about the innovation before we approach tech transfer. So I'm going to get into tech transfer in a little bit and the process of spinning out. That's one of the themes I wanted to discuss today, to the extent that some of my experiences can help the community there and help Twist. I'd love to share them. But I wanted to first also chat a little bit about what does it take to identify an innovation that does have the potential for tech transfer and an entrepreneurial venture. And I'll again do it through my own journey. So as I mentioned, the miniature integrated microscope definitely had great promise for enabling neuroscience research and understanding these long-standing questions with respect to how the brain works or how it does not. But when it came to really thinking about starting a company, I really took a step back. And maybe this was in part because of my training from UPenn and whatever informal entrepreneurial experiences that I had prior. Not every innovation makes sense to start a company around. And that does not mean that the innovation might not be game-changing. There are so many examples of innovations, inventions that made an impact in society, but did not need a startup or a company to translate into society. So that's an important point. But even before we get there, I think it's very important as grad students, as postdocs, that even if we're interested in starting a company and in entrepreneurship, and the ideal thing is, of course, your PhD thesis or your research turns into that company. But it's very important still to almost compartmentalize your attachment to your thesis and to your research. It's important to compartmentalize that from, does this innovation make sense to turn into a business? These are two very different things. Most of the work we do as PhD researchers, as postdocs, by definition is novel. By definition, a PhD thesis is a product of novel research. A publication is the product of novel research, by definition. But the question of, is that research truly compelling for a business, is a very different question. And especially at Stanford, but also in many other universities that are on the leading edge of research, and where either proactively or just environmentally you're exposed to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, there's often a tendency, a knee-jerk reaction to say, I'm going to figure out how to make my idea, my research into a company. There's often that knee-jerk reaction, right? That I want to do it all. I want to publish my great research and I want to start a company because you know what? That's a cool thing to do. I would love to start a company. We all would love to start a company, perhaps. We would also, all like to say our research is extremely impactful and suitable for starting a company. But it's very important that as we get towards the end of our research experience, whether it's the PhD thesis or towards the end of one's postdoc or fellowship, it's very important, if there is that entrepreneurship interest in you, or folks are telling you that, hey, have you thought of starting a company around this idea? It's very important that you take a step back, and independent of the fact that your research is cool and is leading to a paper that might have hundreds of citations in the future, independent of that fact, you've got to ask yourself the first question, which I often call my first of 3 rules as part of spawning a university-based startup. The first question, which I'll formalize into a rule later, is, does this innovation truly address a societal need, and a need that is really beyond what your family and friends and immediate scientific community thinks as cool and real, right? So that is very important. That at the end of the day, you've got to ask yourself, is there a real need that this research, this innovation is addressing, is going to help solve? And the second and very correlated question is, if at the end of the day, we feel that, yes, there is definitely, a need here. There is definitely a real problem that we're solving. Then it's very important to ask yourself, is business, is entrepreneurship the right model to translate this promising innovation into something tangible that can then address the need for the long term? The reason I say that is because starting a business is the easy part in context of what lies ahead. So if you haven't, convinced yourself that the entrepreneurial vehicle is the right vehicle for this innovation to get out of the university, then I can tell you it'll be very difficult to convince investors, and certainly in the future customers, and to really scale the business and make it successful. So you've got to first ask yourself these two very soul-searching, sometimes gut-wrenching questions. Is the innovation truly solving a problem and a need? And then secondly, is business the right way to bring this innovation out into society? And why do I stress on this second point? Is business the right way to transfer this into society? This gets back to tech transfer. So great innovations and technologies have multiple avenues to make their way into society. So assuming that your innovation truly, you've done the homework, truly has a need that it's solving, Twist and your peers and advisors and entrepreneurs, will tell you that there are many ways to get this out of the lab, and a business is just one of those ways. One of the traditional ways that tech transfer has worked is licensing, right? At the end of the day, you look at a company like Genentech here in Silicon Valley, now part of Roche. Its, at the end of the day, portfolio was based on licensing some game-changing patents from Stanford. You look at a bunch of biotech companies, you look at a bunch of even tech companies. They have grown and scaled because of licensing of innovative science and technology. You look at a lot of modern therapeutics companies that are formed, whether it's in the US or in Europe. And they're often formed because they've identified a great professor and a great research project that has come up with a candidate pathway, let's say, or a candidate therapeutic. And this, professor and this, group and the university as a whole, feels that starting a company around this is maybe not the right thing to do, because this is a 10-year project to get it to the clinic, might require way more, dollars than, what a startup could raise. And at the end of the day is incredibly risky. So, licensing is a great model to at least get this out of the lab, to get some rewards and some cash flow into the university and into the inventors. And then the licensee, the company that's taking the technology, the rights to the technology and innovation, takes on the risk of commercializing this. So that's one path. But I'll go even beyond that. There are many examples of other non-licensing and non-entrepreneurial means of getting technology and science and software out of the university. Open source, right? A lot of software and algorithms out there are taken into society via open source methods. And those often work great, because at the end of the day, if one feels that there isn't a huge market potential, and or if there isn't a great commercial mechanism vehicle for translating the innovation into society, there are precedents, especially in software, for open source means of transfer, of knowledge transfer, of software transfer, and into impact. And the originators, the inventors, will get all the credit. At the end of the day, they might not become entrepreneurs, but they will still be recognized as being the source of this great software tool that originated from this lab, this university. So the point here of the second question and second theme is that it's really important to create a business plan. And this often, I have found, is forgotten. When we think about whether or not business is the right way to commercialize an innovation, the first step is to really come up with a business plan. And I can't stress this enough. as an entrepreneur myself, and as someone who had a little bit of training in business, I almost, sometimes would roll my eyes when I would hear, folks say, oh, you got to work on writing a business plan, and learning how to write a business plan is good practice. Before I started in Scopix, I would often think that this all sounds great in theory, but when you have a great idea and you know that it has potential impact out there that it can enable, why bother with a business plan? Oh, just go get some VCs and throw in some money and you're off to the races. I do think a business plan is an incredibly important exercise as you decide whether entrepreneurship and business is the right vehicle to transfer the innovation. Because what a business plan will force you to do is to ask those hard questions. That is there, again, a need? But more importantly, since hopefully by now you've addressed the fact that yes, there is a need and your innovation should be, transferred into society. The question then is, how big is the need? And if you're thinking about starting a company, it's really important to think not just, again, about the startup phase, but to have a 10-year plan, to be honest, especially for a science technology-based company. Science is hard. Game-changing innovations that are going to revolutionize entire categories are not 5-year projects. These are not internet startups. These are hard tech startups that take 10 years or more. Look at the examples out there, and some of Elon Musk's companies are great examples, right? Tesla, SpaceX, recently Neuralink, in my own space, in our space of brain health. These are companies that go after hard problems, and someone like Elon Musk, commits to it for almost, his entire life, if you will, right? He's not someone who starts a company and says, you know what, I'm looking to get rich quickly. I'm going to, spend a couple of years, get us off the ground, get some money in, and I'm going to look to exit in 5 years. Nope. That's not the way great tech and science-driven companies are started. Great tech and science-driven companies are started with a long-term vision, a vision to get humans into Mars, in the case of SpaceX, a vision to upload thoughts to computers and to, outcompete AI, if you will, in the context of Neuralink. And it's really important that when you are thinking about building your science-based startup, that you go through this exercise of a business plan. Because again, starting the company is the easy part. Growing it, scaling it, and truly getting your innovation into society in an impactful and sustainable way is the hard part. And a business plan will focus you on the tough questions that you've got to answer. And at some point, I'm happy to re-engage with this committee to talk about what it takes to write a business plan and what are my, if you will, advice, especially for science and tech-based business plans. But we don't have the time today, so I'm not going to get into what I look for as an entrepreneur, or what a potential investor would look for in a business plan. For me and for you, what is most important is using the business plan in this context to answer the question, does your business make sense? Or are there other vehicles to translate your innovation? Open source, licensing, distribution, non-commercially speaking. But coming back to the startup, let's say now, you did your business plan, you identified a market, here's the TAM, X billion dollars, here is the team you want to bring together, here are the milestones you want to hit, and you do all of these things, and the technology will be productized, it'll find customers, and before you know it, your dream, your innovation is making its way into society, and humanity is getting better, right? So if you start seeing all this coming together in the context of a business plan, you're running it by friendlies, which is something I really encourage you to do, that even before you approach investors, it's really important to take your business plan and run it by the leaders at Twist, by folks that have started companies in the past, to get the critical feedback. But once all that is done, I come to my third kind of question, or my third rule, if you will, of university-based startups. And the third rule is, don't raise money because you want to raise money, or because you feel that this is what you need to operate the company. Now, this sounds really weird, right? That here you're about to start a company, and I'm telling you, don't raise money just to start the company. It almost sounds like a paradox. You need money to start a company. How can we start a company without money? And you need money to operate a company. How do you operate a company without money? So where am I coming from? And this is where I'll end so that we have ample time here for Q&A. Where I'm coming from is that money, and especially equity dilutive capital, is absolutely imperative to seed a venture and to help provide growth financing in the future, no question. But you do not start a company based on that premise. In my opinion, you start a company based on money coming from your customers. You start a company based on a business model that drives dollars and that is truly your primary source of operating working capital. Now, this is not always true for science-based startups, therapeutics-based startups that don't have customers until some approval is met 5 or 10 years down the road. So those are absolutely unique scenarios where you've got to raise sometimes tens, hundreds of millions of dollars along the way to try to get to your endpoint before you actually have customers. But when you have customers, it's almost like a hockey stick rise to infinity in terms of revenue potential. But for many other companies, especially in my case for Inscopix, which was kind of a tool-based company, here is a research tool that I wrote my business plan around. I convinced myself that there was a real market in the research space, let alone in pharma. And I, certainly, needed a little bit of capital to just get an office, get a few people in the door in terms of employees, and get off to the races. But again, I started by going to my potential customers and not going to VCs. So imagine how odd of a story is this. Here I am in Silicon Valley, with access to VCs on Sandal Road and to all kinds of, sources of equity dilutive capital. But the first thing I did was I said that, no, let me go find the potential customers of this product when it becomes a product in 1 to 2 years. And let me try to see first if they're really going to put their money where their mouth is. Now, here they are, giving us all this great feedback that this technology is so great, the data is game changing. Well, okay, if you really believe in that, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, a huge private medical foundation here in the United States that funds a lot of neuroscience research. We went to them and I said, well, look, your researchers have been saying that they would love to get their hands on this tool if it became a product. Are you willing to negotiate a contract with Inscopix with some good down payments that help us to get literally, some capital into R&D, into productization? And then, of course, once we deliver, the revenues flow in. Are you willing to literally put, quote unquote, your money is where your mouths are? We went to Pfizer, and Michael Ehlers, who was at that time the chief scientific officer at Pfizer. Of course, Pfizer is back in the news again with this vaccine that they're on the cusp of introducing. Unfortunately, they have shut down their neuroscience division. But back in 2012, 2013, when they had a vibrant neuroscience division led by Michael Ehlers, we went to them and I said, look, if you believe that these kinds of data sets are the future of preclinical drug development in Europe, let's put a contract together so that you can help me get off the ground and invest some of the first milestone payment dollars into my R&D. And in 1 to 2 years, we'll be ready with product, we'll deliver it to you, and we'll recognize the full revenues then. So our first checks were actually from potential customers, I should say real customers. The only reason I call them potential is because we didn't have a product then. So if we did not deliver to them, they would really not be our customers. But obviously they became our customers, but they were our first checks. Our first checks came from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and from Pfizer. And when we had these checks, we felt like there really was a business here because holy cow, I mean, we have potential customers who are giving us, hefty down payments, investing in us so that we can take this technology, build it into a product, and sell it into their labs and into their pharmaceutical company. So it gave us a lot of confidence. And then it gave me not only a business model, but real customer proof points when I did go out to VCs. And oh my, there is no better validation of your business model than having potential customers, even better, checks that you can show. And then the money came in. There wasn't really much effort. And through the story of Inscopix, which again I can get to at some point, there's a lot to unpack, but I've remained true to this last rule or this last thesis, that you raise capital literally from VCs and equity dilutive sources for growth, so that you're really driving a step change in valuation. And of course, in the early outset of a company, literally for that seed, but really again to drive a certain value creation objective, and not just for operating reasons, and certainly not just because it's a cool thing to do to go raise money. There are huge expectations and ramifications with raising equity dilutive capital from investors. So that's where I'll end. Three main rules, if you will, to kind of wrap up here for all of you budding entrepreneurs, science, technology entrepreneurs. Number one, your innovation by definition is novel. You would not be doing a PhD or a postdoc if you're not working on novel research. But really ask yourself, does your innovation fill a need that is beyond a certain scientific niche, beyond a certain community that right now you're working in? And then the second rule really is, if you really believe that there is a bigger need that your innovation is addressing, ask yourself, is business, entrepreneurship, the right vehicle to translate that innovation from the bench into society? Write that business plan. Make sure you're collaborating with Twist and folks like Alex very early on, so that they're asking you the hard questions and you are figuring out, is it licensing? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it some other source of distribution that makes sense in the context of taking this innovation out from the bench and into society? And then lastly, if you have now literally convinced yourself that business and entrepreneurship is the right vehicle for translating the innovation into society, ask yourself, who are your customers? And can you go to some of these potential customers? And can you at least get, strong expressions of interest, if not, contracts with down payments? And that should really be your primary objective in terms of getting that first, proof point, that first validation. And if you get that, raising money, growth capital, seed capital really becomes much easier. And honestly, your growth capital or your seed capital is then used for the right reasons. It's not used to operate the company, but it's used to invest in a certain facility or in a certain R&D infrastructure, without which you would just not be able to achieve success. It would be used in the future as you start productizing your technology, and we can talk about product market fit and the next steps of commercialization at some point in the future, because the journey only begins with a startup. As I said, science, technology-based startups are long journeys. But once you're also out there in the middle of your journey, as Inscopix is now about 9-10 years old. And we're very much, I would say, in the middle of our journey. Even today, where I am, I remain true to this thesis that whereas there are potential investors out there who are always interested in investing in Inscopix, I always ask myself, why would I want to raise money? And what will it really enable? If it's just operating capital and incrementally growing the company, let's just do that with revenues. That's the right way to do it. But if there is some game-changing step change that investment dollars can help enable, that I cannot enable just through revenues, then there's a right reason to go and seek growth financing. So that's where I'll wrap. I think we have about 15 minutes here for Q&A. So happy to take any questions here. And thank you again so much, Alex and the Twist team, for inviting me to give you one of these talks.
Thanks, Kunal, for your inspiration and for your words that hopefully will have also some impact on the people that attended the Twist talk today. So maybe you just made some of these unicorns or at least real success cases happen. What I take away is, aim high, go for problems that are real problems that solve societal issues, and don't be scared actually to reach out to people that help you. Seek advice and force yourself to answer and face the hard questions write a business plan, and confront yourself with the hard questions, as well as test your answers with people surrounding you to make sure you get out at the right point. So thanks again for everybody on the screen that participated today. We're looking forward to a next Twist Talk, which will be announced in due time. And until then, stay healthy, be creative, and set up companies. We are always happy to help you in the context of IST Cube, the Twist tech transfer team, and let's do it. Thanks, everybody. Good night and good evening. And have a good day, Kunal.
Thank you. Thank you.